Good evening, folks, and welcome to another episode of Beer Rating with Sean Connors. As you can see, the beer I got today is the brewery's Oud Beersel, and it's called Ber Salis Sourblend. It's a blonde sour ale. Kind of excited about this one because I've never had a sour ale, and this is actually a mixture of sour ale and blonde ale. I'll just pop it open. A little bit of carbonization, you can see there. Got a nice color. Different smell. Sour ales come from Belgium, and this one is no different. It actually comes from the town Beersel, which is just outside Brussels. It's 6% alcohol. As I said, it's a mixture of blonde ale and sour ale. So it's considered an aged Lambic mixed blonde ale, and they actually age it for 3 years. This brewery has been around since 1882. However, in the early 2000s, I think about 2002, 2004, somewhere around there, they actually closed down for a short period, and then somebody else opened it up. So basically, because they were one of the few left traditional Lambic breweries, and we'll talk about Lambics in a second. And for the 10th anniversary of the reopening, they actually developed this one. And I'm going to read this word for word what they say about this one. They say, it's a beer that will conquer the hearts of people that have yet to need to fall in love with the traditional Lambic beer. So Lambic beer is a specific type of beer, which I'll talk about in a second, and this one is actually a mixture of the traditional Lambic and a blonde ale. So you're not going, if you want to try something different and you're kind of iffy with the whole concept of sour beer, this one is kind of like a starting point. So like I said, I've never had this type of beer. It's actually got a bit of a fruity smell to it. It's different. It's definitely not bad, and they do a second fermentation in the bottle. I was expecting it to be a little bit more in your face type of thing. It's actually pretty mild, so I guess that's the whole idea, is use it as a starting beer for Lambic. So okay, we'll talk a little bit about Lambic. What is Lambic? Lambic is basically a sour beer. Actually, to be more specific, it's a sour wheat beer that is brewed specifically either in or around Brussels, such as this one, which is, this brewery is actually like 10 kilometers outside Brussels. As a result of that, it's normally rather rare to find Lambic beers. They normally do smaller volumes, and because they're only brewed in specific locations, they're harder to find. And they say it's they call it a most interesting and complex beer. Like I said, this one is actually not a true Lambic. It's a Lambic plus a blonde ale, so it's a starting point, what I consider a starting point. And generally they're known as sour and very dry. And I guess what I'm kind of shocked about this one, with the sour blend, I was actually expecting more of a sour taste, and it's there a little bit, but not as much as I expected. It's definitely there, but it's not overwhelming. So I guess that was the whole purpose of this beer, is to introduce people to sour beers. And hopefully I can find a Lambic. As I said, they're rather hard to find. They're rare. So I don't know if I'm going to be able to find one locally. Next time I'm in Belgium, I'll definitely check it out. But if I do find one, I'll do one on that one. Another thing about Lambic beers, they normally have 2 fermentations minimum. And they say the first fermentation is alcohol producing, and the second one is acid producing. What's also interesting about Lambic beers is the yeast and the bacteria that are used in the beer are wild yeast and wild bacteria. And I think I mentioned that in one of the other reviews I did. I think I might have used the term spontaneous fermentation. And what it is, generally when somebody's developing a beer, they'll use a specific strain of yeast. And they narrow it down, they know exactly what they want. When you're using wild yeast and wild bacteria, that's not always the case. although it kind of is. I know I'm contradicting myself, but I'll explain it right now. Basically, with wild yeast, the way it works is they don't specifically add the yeast or bacteria to the beer. What they do is they go through the process, the beer making process, and as we said before, you normally cool it and then you ferment it in a vessel. Now with lambic beers, it's a little bit different. They do cool it, but they cool it, once it's cooled, they put it in what they call a cool ship. And what that is, it's basically, from what my gathering, I'm not a brewmaster, so I could be a little bit wrong, but from what I gather, it's kind of like a large open container, vat, whatever the case might be. And the key word there is that it's opened. And because it's opened to the elements. And in fact, most breweries, they'll cool it over, and once it's cooled, they'll leave it in these cool ships overnight with the windows open. And the whole purpose of the window is while the cool air comes in, and they also brew it only specific times a year, the cooler ones. The cool air will come in to help cool the beer, but it's also bringing with it wild yeast and wild bacteria, and that's what's used to ferment the beer. So normally and we said it's only brewed in and around Brussels because specific bacteria normally congregate in specific areas. Sometimes it's a geographic location, and other times it could be within the brewery. I've read one story, basically a brewery they were moving, they did spontaneous fermentation, and it's just basically the yeast and bacteria in the air in the brewery. So when they moved to the new brewery, they actually took a wall down from the old brewery and put it in the new brewery. So those wild yeast and bacteria that were on the wall would be used in the beer. Now for me, I'm not a biologist by any means, but it's kind of cool when you think about it that they can get a consistent beer with wild yeast. As I said, I guess, specific locations have specific beer. So if you actually move your brewery to another area, you might not get the same product unless you do what I just said. The brewery actually took a wall and put it in the new brewery. So there you go. That's your basic idea of lambic brews. There are actually 5 different types of lambic, 5 different styles, I should say. Your basic is what they just call a basic lambic, and that's generally, it's unblended, so it's just whatever they make. Generally not carbonated, so you're not going to get the fizz that we kind of get here. Obviously it's sour, and quite often you're only going to get it on tap at the specific locations in Brussels. So if you're ever in and around Brussels, be sure to check it out. Another one it's the Bière de Mars, and I actually kind of don't really get the concept of this. They say they use the second runnings of the lambic, and what I'm thinking, once they go through the process, what's left in the hops or whatever, I guess they reuse that. As I said, I'm not really sure. If I ever find one, I'll definitely do some more research. I can give you a better understanding. Another one is what they call a faro, and that's normally lower alcohol. It's sweeter, and what it is, it's a mixture of the lambic, which we mentioned, and the Bière de Mars. Fourth, we have what they call a goose, or gouzou. I'm probably not pronouncing it right. And generally that's a mix of young and old lambics. And the final one is fruit. Fruit lambics are normally, obviously, they're going to be a little bit sweeter. Traditionally, they use either cherry or raspberries. Also, black currants and peaches have been used. And recently, cranberries and strawberries. A lot of traditional lambic lovers, I guess, or brewmasters, or whatever you call them, they don't really like that, but it is helping to get the word out for lambics. So there you go, folks. That's your quick lesson on lambic beers. If you can find one, by all means, pick it up and give it a try. As I said, I'm hoping to get a true lambic. This is, as I mentioned right from the get-go, it's a mixture of lambic and blonde ale. They're trying to use it as a beer to introduce people to sour beers. So I'm actually quite surprised. I was expecting a little bit more sour. It's definitely different. It's not a bad different. I'm actually enjoying more than I thought it would, be totally honest. As I said, I normally go into these with open mind, but I was kind of iffy with the whole concept of a sour beer. And hopefully I can find a true lambic to get a better idea. Okay, so this one, the Oud Beersel Breweries Ber Salis Sourblend Blonde Sour Ale. My rating for this one, it's definitely one to try. I think I'm going to give this one a 3.5. It seems like lately that's been my go-to rating. I haven't found anything that's really bad, and at the same point, I haven't found anything that would consider great. I think last week I actually gave a 4.0 to the traditional Pilsner or the original Pilsner. But this one, I think 3.5 is reasonable. It's definitely a beer to introduce you to something new. So it's the weekend, by all means. Pick one up. Go on my Facebook page or my YouTube channel. Let me know what you think. Tell me if you agree with 3.5, or do you think it should be higher? Do you think it should be lower? So as always, until next beer, enjoy responsibly. Cheers.